It's a joyous occasion to be here to summon the life of Tunga, who's an artist that we were all quite fond of and had the great fortune to work with for such a long period of time. By way of an introduction, and I'll make it brief, on behalf of Lawrence, my partner, Donald Johnson Montenegro, Lauren Whittles, the staff of the gallery, welcome and thank you for coming to this little talk. We're privileged to have two very distinguished art historians and scholars with us in Vivian Crockett here on my left and Paulo Venancio Filho on my left as well. I'll just read you a little bit about both of them so that you have some sense that they're not pretenders to the throne. They've been around for a while, some a little bit longer than others. Paulo is a curator, art critic, professor at the School of Fine Arts at the Universidade Federale Rio de Janeiro. He's published text on many Brazilian artists, including Antonio Manuel, Eliota Sica, Cildo Morelas, Ligia Pape, Valtercio Caldas, Mira Chandel, Franz Weissman, and Ana Maria Maialino, amongst others. He was a curator of the Century City, Art and Culture in the Modern Metropolis, which is at the Tate Modern in London in 2001. Curator of Piero Manzoni at the Museo di Arte Moderna di San Paolo in 2015. Tunga, Conjuncções Magnéticas at Instituto Itaú Cultural this past year in San Paulo. Miro Calder at the Casa Roberto Mourinho's Rio de Janeiro in 2022. And we met him, interestingly enough, back in 2003 when he curated a show of one of our gallery artists, Rachel White-Reed, which was in Rio and then in San Paulo the following year. Welcome, and thank you for agreeing to participate. Vivian, it's such a pleasure to get to know you especially. Vivian is a new museum curator and Brazilian-American scholar focusing largely on modern and contemporary art of African diasporas, Latinx diasporas, and the Americas at the varied intersections of race, gender, and queer theory. Crockett previously worked as the Nancy and Tim Hanley Assistant Curator of Contemporary Art at the Dallas Museum of Art. Prior to that, she was a Joan Tisch Teaching Fellow at the Whitney and an Andrew Mellon Museum Research Fellow in the Department of Media and Performance at the Museum of Modern Art. While in New York, she also worked on independent curatorial projects with various arts organizations, including the Leslie Lohman Museum, Queer Art and Visual Aids, for whom she co-curated the 2017 Day Without Art, Alternative Endings, Radical Beginnings. A PhD candidate in art history at Columbia, she holds a BA from Stanford and an MA and an MPhil in art history from Columbia. Her scholarly contributions can be found in publications from several institutions, including the Met, Museum of Modern Art, the Studio Museum in Harlem, the Leslie Lohman Museum, and the Museo di Arte de San Paulo, amongst others. Welcome, Vivian. Thank you so much for coming, and I leave it to the two of you.
So Paulo, you had mentioned you wanted to give a little overview on Tunga for those who are less familiar with him. Maybe we'll keep that brief and interweave some of that history into the talk.
Okay. First, I have to thank the gallery, Luhring Augustine, directors, all the staff, and also Instituto Tunga. Without both, this exhibition would not be possible. So I thank the gallery and the Instituto Tunga. Well, when I was invited to do the show, I thought of doing a museum room, if possible, a museum room of Tunga. The last show of Tunga here at Luhring Augustine was 2014. He died in 2016. So I thought that he was not more here, and I had to design the show. And I thought to do not exactly a retrospective, not a chronology exhibition, because Tunga didn't believe in chronology. Chronology didn't wasn't a part of his process, and so what I did was to select a few groups of works from different periods. Chronology has to do with time, but time was not in Tunga's mind, because if you look closely to the works, you will see that motifs, ideas, images, etc., come and go all over the work. So it's a continuous metabolism of his ideas that goes all the way through the work. I select some very unseen works, not works that were not seen before. We have works from his first exhibition in the vitrines. This exhibition was done in 1974 at the Museum of Modern Art in Rio de Janeiro. Tunga was 21 years at the time. You can feel that there are abstract drawings. At the time, Tunga was looking very much to Henri Michaud and surrealism. If there is a modern movement that was close to Tunga, it's surrealism. And at that time, we were friends. We met at architecture school. He was 2 years ahead of me. And at that time, Duchamp was becoming an influence in Brazil. We had the first modernism, then the constructivists, new concretes, etc., and then pop started to influence Brazilian art. And then came Duchamp. And what influenced Duchamp was not the conceptual Duchamp, not the ready-made, but the large glass, the mythology of the large glass, the erotic universe that was going into the large glass. And I think this first drawings has something to do with the drawings of the bachelors, that is the part below of the large glass. And so in this exhibition, whose title was very daring at the time, because it was the hard times of the military rule, was called the Museum of Childhood Masturbation. The Museum of Childhood Masturbation. So, of course, this reflects his readings at the time, Freud, and his interest in psychoanalysis, as surrealism had also interest in psychoanalysis, but he was reading Bataille, Sade, etc.
Paulo, can I stop you there so
sure.
don't go too off track? I mean, for those who don't know, you recently curated a massive retrospective of Tunga's work, so I just want to mention that. It was on view last year, and the title of that exhibition is an idea that I really want to unpack today, this idea of conjunção magnética, magnetic conjunction. And I feel like this is the first time I've seen in a US gallery a presentation that really gets to different parts of Tunga's practice, and more importantly, is rooted in his works on paper and his interest in drawing, which I think is very central to his work, was very central to your thesis in the larger retrospective, but I think is also reflected in this exhibition. And of course, we're standing behind this incredible work called Vê-nus or Vê-nus, which I think is a great starting point. You chose it as the title of this exhibition, and I think it's worth thinking about what that means. So if we translate the word Vê-nus, you know, it is Venus, this idea of this goddess of love, but is also seeing nude, which to me is less about nudity in a classical, Western classical sense, but more about nakedness and drawing bare.
Exactly.
And I think is something that we really see as a connecting thread in the show. So if you could speak a little bit about the choice to highlight this work and how it connects to the different aspects of the show.
This work was the first, I would say, three-dimensional major work he did after the drawings. And he first made the drawings, and he called this figure, this black figure, Venus. And then he did this work. And I think this work, well, Venus, as Vivian said, is cut by a dash, V, which in Portuguese means to see, and nus, that means nude. So it's the relation, and I think is also resembles the relation of the large glass between bachelors and the bride. And so he is always playing with this, I think this, his erotic imagination and how to translate this in his poetry, because nothing is explicit here. You don't see a nude goddess as you would see in a classical painting. So I think the whole idea of his work is trying to reconfigure the idea of the nude. You can see many works, something relates to the nude. And Bataille, Georges Bataille said that, he said that the nude was the decisive moment. The denudement was the decisive moment. And I think Tunga his mind was going into this idea. Because there's nothing more clear than the nude. Nothing more clear than the nude.
But again, I think more than the nude, I think this idea of eroticism and the eroticism of all the work, I think is really present. And maybe subconsciously, but I think also intentionally, this work also includes a lot of the kind of imagery that appears in his work a lot. You have the comb almost here in this form. I've seen this written about as a kind of vagina dentata. So there's also this teeth. I know there are other iterations that literally include teeth. So in this interest in Bataille, I think it's also about the erotics not only between bodies, but also of materials and the kind of the joining of different forms that you don't necessarily consider as seen together. And when they come together, there's this kind of friction and tension, which I think is very inherent to the work.
Yes, and I would say that there's something sinister in the work of Tunga, because if you look at that drawing there, the draw one over the other, it looks like an idyllic nature scene, water, a waterfall, trees, and then if you look closer, there is a man hanged there, and there's a head cut. So that kind of in his work has a kind of subtext. Like the same with the Tarsila drawings, the two Tarsila drawings, that at that time, I would say early 80s, he was doing some drawings related to the work of Tarsila, the colors of Tarsila, the forms of Tarsila. But if you look closer, there's something that Tarsila wouldn't put, that he put.
Yes, there's an orgy in everything if you look hard enough.
To reveal that was under Tarsila work.
I think that's a really important point, and I did want to talk a little bit about this kind of subtext of violence, and I think more specifically the subtext of colonial violence, which I think is not spoken a lot about in his work, but I think a lot of the imagery that he's pulling from and a lot of even the allegories are of course connected to the history of the occupation of Brazil and this kind of merging of European culture with indigenous and African culture.
He did some works that were related to the Brazilian cultural tradition. Some of the first his sculptures, they were called tacapes. You know, tacapes is the weapon that the Indians use. So along the work, he sometimes approached to this cultural Brazilian heritage, the tipiti, that is not here, but the tipiti is Indian mesh.
It comes from Tupi, right?
To press manioc and to do the manioc flour. Yes. So he's always searching new words to involve in his fantasies, his process of imagination.
But again, I think it's a part of his work that isn't spoken about as much. And I think it's a really important piece. And also, you know, there's a work that's also not reflected in this show, but was I think, represented in your retrospective, À la lumière de deux mondes, which I think includes these elements of the tacape, but also, you know, Afro-Brazilian culture. And to have that placed in the Louvre, I think, is very important. We can't get away from talking about anthropophagia. There's just no way we're not going to do it. So.
Vivian is mentioned this work he did at the Louvre under the pyramid of the Louvre called La Lumière de deux mondes. And I think that work for him was a kind of revenge. You understand? Because he was kind of putting the colonial, the work that was under the colonization, he was putting there in the greatest museum of the world, now of the greatest museum of Western art. So there was something like that, I think, this idea of kind of revenge, not affirmation there, at that place. I think that was one of his ideas.
I was curious to think through, I think there's a lot of incredible content on Tunga. I mean, you can, read stacks and stacks of books and essays, and I think a lot of them kind of move through this kind of French theorist framework or a Lacanian framework. But I think what draws me to Tunga as a contemporary scholar is that there's still a lot to unpack in the work. And for me, the most interesting artists are the ones that bring, some kind of problematic or tension in the work. And I wonder what you see the kind of future of the study of Tunga's work as being.
This exhibition stops at one point. I thought we have works from the late years of his life, like those drawings from the series La Voix Humide, but a large part of the work can be shown. It was his performance. He didn't like the word performance. He called instaurations. And that was this kind of, well, continuous theatrical action that will involve people, materials, etc., etc. It would take hours, and we have some of them on film. But to show this would involve a much more larger show with more rooms, etc., to explain how he went to this kind of work that is still not well known, because
maybe the next show.
Maybe the next show. I hope so.
But even with the instalações, I mean, I think when we think about this kind of phantasmic body or the abstracted body, there's this kind of sense of neutrality. It's a body that we're not really talking about in gendered terms or racialized terms, but there's no way to not think about that. And I think he did some very specific instalações which dealt with the racial politic of Brazilian institutions in a way that I feel like have been under-discussed, and I think Sueli Rolnick is the only person I've read who's really dealt with that directly. But for example, in '97, he did this instalação called Sem Redes, 100 Networks, where he's bringing so-called errand boys into the museum and having them activate the work. In another project a little bit later, he is bringing homeless people from the surrounding area of the Centro Cultural into the museum. And I mean, there's a clear tension there, right? And
sure.
It's complicated,
one
right?
of his works at that time was Teresa. That Teresa is a name for woman, women, Teresa. But it also means the rope that people in prison would do to escape prison. They call Teresa. So Tunga is always playing with this double meaning. So it was the name of the woman, but that at the same time was this rope that the prisoner would made of clothes, etc., to escape from prisons. So you see how I said here, there is this motto of surrealism that is the phrase of Luhring. I kind of paraphrase here. It's going like this: beautiful as a sudden encounter of an umbrella with a sewing machine in a dissection table. So is this, that's something from here, something from there. Suddenly they get together and something happened. It's not. It was not previously imagined or projected. I think Tunga worked in this kind of strategic thinking of now letting things come into the work and to get into the work and so he could transform these things into his poetry, his visual poetry or plastic poetry.
And what you're describing is a kind of definition of this term from Tunga, which is also energia de conjunção, right? Conjunction energy. So it's this idea of heterogeneous things that come together and they create this kind of third thing. And I think the work really escapes binaristic thinking, but at the same time, it's there, it's present, but it is something that I think there's a queer element in the work. I consider Tunga's work to be quite queer, even though I think it also relies very heavily on masculinist mythology that comes from surrealism. I think there's a way in which like the erotics of the female body is used in certain ways that I find problematic, but still kind of interesting to think through.
Let me tell you a story that just came to my mind now.
I know, I want to hear the anecdote.
Tunga was with a friend, a painter, Daniel Feingold, who is a friend of us here. And Tunga was invited to this party, very fancy party. And he was with Daniel. And Daniel lost his girlfriend. He said, no, I don't want to go, I don't want to go. But Tunga said, let's go, let's go. So they went, and at the door, there was a doorman with the list. Who are you? I'm Tunga, and you? And Tunga said, grabbed him. He's my boyfriend. and they got into the exhibition.
But I think there is a fluidity there. I think the work does do that. I mean, if you look at the drawings behind, I love these entanglements of bodies where you don't know where one ends and the other begins. And I think that's almost like this concept from something that's quite, you might hang in any conservative household, a kind of the Taurus over here on this wall, which is this kind of infinity loop, but then there's an infinity loop in bodies too, and forms and everything.
This is something that Tunga brought here from the new concrete is the Moebius strip. Moebius strip, it has no end, goes and come back and goes and come back. And I think this happens in his work. Some things sometimes disappear, then they will reappear later, and one will disappear. So it's this continuous movement, but into the same universe of images, motifs, must always transform them.
And that's how it escapes chronology, right? There's no sense of a kind of order of things because everything kind of connects back to each other. I really love that one there too, which is this kind of torus form of these two bodies, and it's and they're connected, but they're also capillary twins.
Hair was something very a motif that appears in many places of Tunga. There is the metal scalp there. So the hair was there is a very well known called the gêmeas hipófagus that they are linked by the hair. So they are twins, but the union, Siamese, you can say, but they're linked by the hair. So his imagination worked in these possibilities. No? For instance, there is one drawing there of a lizard. And you know that if you cut the tail of the lizard, it grows again. But he imagined if you cut the tail of the lizard, it would grow another lizard, opposite to the first one. You understand?
So a lizard with two heads or a lizard with two tails,
yes,
and
exactly.
Never quite what you expect from that. And then, I mean, like you said, this kind of the subtext of violence. I mean, to me, the scalp is very kind of violent. It's a scalping in a very kind of literal warlike sense, and it has that unease to it. In the same way that kind of form in the, I guess that's gouache or watercolor of some kind. There's a decapitated head. If you're not looking hard enough, you might miss that kind of sense of that. And even in these larger installations, with you see the artist's head kind of hanging below this beautiful form, and you get lost in all the turns and twists of the lines, and you forget that there are these body parts present there. I wondered if we could talk also a little bit about the exogenous axis, which I think is one of the works I was alluding to in this kind of mythology around women and the kind of myth of this, that these are actually twins that are frozen and they bore a tree, and then their frozen body creates the silhouette. So I don't know if everyone kind of realizes the shape that these kind of totemic forms take is the profile, which I think you see more clearly in the drawings of someone's, body, this face, and then the breasts. And
Tunga invited some friends, girls, women, and they would pose nude behind a screen of paper. So he would draw the profile. And then the profile was transferred to a machine that would not make it into wood. So it's this double, not this double image, because you see the head is also a cup and also the profile of the girl.
It's kind of the Rubens vase idea, right? Where you have like a vase, but it's also two profiles, but extended to the whole body.
Yeah. It's one thing and the other. You know, Aristotle's non-contradiction, he said, one thing can be the other thing at the same time. And Tunga did the opposite. One thing could be the other thing at the same time. No? So this is, and I was going to talk about also this, always this double, the idea of the double, not one and the other. Tunga's mother, Leia, had a twin sisters. So, and they were painted by the famous modernist Brazilian artist Guignard. The painting is at the Museum of Modern Art in Rio. So it's already some place there in his family story, his memoirs. That's the idea of the twins, right? Who, I think he would say, which one is my mother? He would think, which one is my mother? Maybe the two, probably, I don't know, but something like that.
Did he ever do a psychoanalysis session with Lygia Clark? I would be very curious for that transcript.
No, I don't think so. No, he did. I don't know. No, he didn't. As far as I know, maybe, but as a teenager, not. I think at the time I knew him, it was when we were almost teenagers, 20. I think he did some. He was very much interested in psychoanalysis, but I can't remember he did. When Lygia Clark came to Paris, we became a bit closer with her, and she would meet us to talk and to see exhibitions, stuff like that. But it was not him, it was I who did the therapy of Lygia Clark.
Oh, I want to hear about those too. Over a brigadeiro and some champagne in the other room. Speaking kind of in this Freudian sense, I don't know if everyone who's here had a chance to go in the other room. One, because there's brigadeiros and that's reason enough, but also there's this wonderful work that includes the bijoux de Madame Sade, which I think is a really important concept to talk about as well.
It's a very important work. We have a sample here. He made several works that he used magnets, not, and I think magnets was the material representation of the idea that he had that things could connect, the conjunções magnéticas, things could be connected, and this is what the magnet does with metals. And so I would say that he was the sculptor who invented magnet as a material of sculpture. I don't know any other sculptor who worked with magnets as he did. So it's something that I would say he was the only one or a pioneer. I don't know exactly, but that's for sure. That's for sure.
And even, I mean, the use of magnets not as, one thing attracts the other and that's it, but there's a kind of precarious quality to it. Like it could also demagnetize at any time. And I think more interesting too is the use of iron fillings, which are also magnetic. And so you get this effect that looks like animal-like. It's like these hairs growing and they move in these different forms. And, you're not supposed to touch the art, but one could manipulate it and kind of shift the way that looks. And I think that's really important.
And it's also that you feel that is menacing you. It has a menacing quality.
Yeah.
You don't feel very at ease looking at.
It's a bishu, a bishu
Yes, yes.
in that sense.
Exactly. The idea is interesting. That could be a Ligia Clark bicho to another.
Another degree.
Yeah, to another degree.
And we had to move this beautiful piece that was here as well, but it's now on the counter near maybe the Johnny Walker that's still out, maybe not. But I think those series of works are also really interesting. They were started around 2014, I think, pretty late in his life.
Around 2014, I think.
And there's one behind some of you there as well. And there are these, again, hybrid forms that include fingers and orifices and voids.
This is the last series of sculptures Tunga did. They are made of bronze. There's a series of these works. We brought 2 in this exhibition. And it's still not the idea of the energy of conjunction, not the eros, not, and I think it relates also to the idea of, came from Freud, not the sexual morphology, that the whole body is an erogenous zone. So Tunga related not the body, not anymore as a whole, but you could put together a ear with a finger and a nose with an arm, because it's the same. Everything's going through these parts of the body. And I think this is still, we don't know where Tunga would go from these works, but it's still the same process, the same ideas, always transforming, always moving.
But even with these, I think what's interesting is that I consider this a kind of a later stage of this process where it's this pristine bronze and it's very, sleek and it has this kind of quality, but the fact that they were started actually by hand with clay and it's him manipulating them and you really see the mark of his hand. So it's almost like this kind of automatic drawing. He's like making these different associations and then, making a finger and then making a breast and then making this other form, which I think if you don't know that kind of history with those objects, they look like they were just this, finished thing, but in fact, they're part of this process.
Sure. And also, something I think about the work of Tunga, that he would not accept anything that would not do exactly properly, not pristine. The work had to be perfect, pristine, with the very specific material, the very specific manufacture, etc., etc. It's something that he had this care with the work. It's care.
He gets messy too, though. Right? I mean, there's pristine, but there's also and maybe the instalações are where he lets loose.
The instalações is something that are much more spontaneous. There's a space for informality or spontaneity, but not the works. I would say drawings, three-dimensional.
I mean, he's an incredible draftsman. He has a really amazing skill at drawing, which comes through here for sure. Could we talk a little bit also about, were you going to say something else?
No, it's something that sometimes strikes me is how sometimes I feel the work of Tunga as being coming from antiquity and being so contemporary. Do you understand that?
Yeah.
Because this morphological could be understood as an object of a cult You understand?
Yeah.
And at the same time, they're so contemporaneous, so they cross time. I think the work of Tunga crossed time from centuries, millenniums to millenniums, in a sense, if you go deep into the work.
And also I think the ways that each person is going to see different things or experience different things in the work. I mean, to me, these remind me a lot of André Breton and this idea of that ashtray, Cinderella's ashtray, the cendrier de Cendrillon, which is like, you know, this vessel, but it has the shoe and it's this kind of bodily form. And all of these, I think, are really unique and very, very biomorphic and strange.
Sure.
Could we talk also a little bit about the drawings here and then the ones that are in the other room, which also kind of loop and duplicate imagery?
This is probably the last series of drawings that Tunga made. It was called La Voix Humide. You know, he used, well, this is something I will mention very briefly, is that the milieu that Tunga lived, where he was born, was mostly influenced by French culture. Now, the 19th century and early 20th century Brazilian culture was mostly influenced by French. No Brazilian artist would go elsewhere than Paris. Now, Paris was the place. And Tunga had also, he came from this. And so this title, La Voix Humide, he used French titles or something. And these amazing, I think these amazing drawings that you don't know where the drawing begins and where the drawing ends. Is done by both hands, that shows his skill. No? And I feel something hypnotic, mesmeric in these works. It's kind of, if you start to follow the lines, you lose yourself and you go into another state of mind, I don't know. And those with colors are the first one to be shown here in the United States. And rarely in Brazil, in the show that I did in 2021 at Instituto Itaú, there are a few ones, but here they are in a group together.
And there are more in the other room, but these are unique because they have this kind of, I don't even know how to say the word in English, but this kind of pastel, that's the colors and the kind of texture of them.
This is interesting because Tunga made a few works much before that he used
makeup.
Not makeup. He used makeup for nails, for face, using sculptures, using objects. So, and I think it continues in these drawings.
And I mean, this idea, you know, Brazilian artists going to France, I think that's true. I think that's especially true of, you know, white descendant Brazilian artists. But then I think there's a way in which then they bring in elements of Brazilian culture into the work, and then that becomes another thing. And, you know, we didn't talk a lot about this other kind of concept that I think conceptually connects the work, which is this idea of braiding and the trança and the way the weaving of, you know, literally three forms that form something that's kind of strong and almost weapon-like.
I said this the other day. Maybe it's a blag that Tunga,
Blag? Like a joke?
Yeah, just a saying that Tunga is the most important French artist since Yves Klein. That's my idea.
I mean, pretty much. Did we want to open it up to questions? I think it might be a good time. Yes. Hi. So in case, for the posterity, the question is the name Tunga, the origin of the name Tunga.
As far as I know, Tunga has an older brother, Gonçalo, he's a diplomat. And as far as I know, this son, Gonçalo, started to call him Tunga or something like, would sound like Tunga. And then
Before he was born, even.
Yeah,
right?
and also, Tunga maintained this mythology also through his life, where he was born, because there are some catalogs that say he was born in Palmares, northeast of Brazil. Other catalogs say he was born in Rio. He never cleared this, and he likes to maintain this, to be born in two different places. This is impossible, but who knows?
I like that all.
Yeah,
He was a
he was.
very
He
carioca
was.
guy.
He was.
Qual é, Rodrigo?
Tunga means if someone quer dar golpe, como é que eu vou dizer? Quer fazer uma... Yeah, it's something like that.
Interesting.
But not him.
More questions? Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit more about the playfulness in his art? I mean, you talk about he's a very playful character, he likes to switch things around a lot. And yet, when we look at the art, one wants to take it very seriously, and yet I think there's some jokes here that...
Oh yeah. He liked very much these contradictions, these, I don't know if it's the word in English, oxymoron.
Yeah.
Oxymoron. Not things that wouldn't fit, but they fit. So he was always thinking, his thinking was not Aristotelic. I would say the logic of Aristotle was something that break the rules of the logic. He was always trying to break the rules, and I think that is the playfulness that I think you mean. And also there is a playfulness, how he changed from drawing to sculpture, from metal to wood, from wood to glass, from video to video. So he was always looking for different medias where he could express his thoughts, his ideas, his motifs, his fantasies.
I mean, I think that's a bit of the anxiety that I feel as an art historian too, because I think we have this urge to kind of categorize and contain and kind of order the logic of an artist. And in a lot of ways, there are these recurring themes, but there's also this porousness that's kind of uncontainable. And, I know the Instituto has been doing a catalog for some time, and it's like, you're cataloging 400 lizards. Like, it's just a lot of ordering of almost a chaotic energy.
I share an apartment with Tunga. We lived together for maybe 3 or 4 years, from 77 to 80s, when Antonio, the son, was born. And it was a mess. It was chaos. And when I visited the studio, I was amazed how he protects things from his early work when he was 17, 18. Everything is there. Thousands of works, perfect. I was astonished because I couldn't believe.
I mean, Oiticica too was obsessive about the way he,
Also, you know, this is something that is very. It has to have a psychoanalytical explanation, because this crazy guy is completely out of. When you go to the archives, everything is so precise. Oiticica, 1 millimeter here, 1 millimeter there.
Yeah.
It's something that unbelievable. How?
Yeah, like 12 p.m. do coke, 3 p.m. go on a walk. Like very,
it goes
rigorous.
It goes completely against the image, the popular image that people have. So, Tunga also, the guy was so, but everything was there so, not very precisely. No.
I think that's part of the magic, no? More questions? There's also a lot of knowledge and a lot of people who knew Tunga in this room, so I'd love to. Oi, Cláudia.
I was going to say that I think he was a very generous person. Like, he would have introduced people to people all the time, have the gatherings at his home, right?
Mm-hmm.
And many people from him, and I think he had that.
He was a person who would gather very different people, and his house was a place of meeting of different people, a place of just of conversation and exchange of ideas and all that stuff.
Yeah, it's emotional.
Yeah.
Of course, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
A bit.
yeah.
It's okay.
A lot.
It's okay.
Yeah, I agree. Yeah, and there are people connected in this space thanks to Tunga and to you. I'll just say that. Yes? Olá, Sérgio.
Oh, Sérgio.
So we know Oiticica took things like really far, but he came from concrete roots, Sapa, the school. He didn't go to the Serpa when Serpa was teaching at the Museum of Modern Art. No, he had no connection. He was mostly autodidacta, self.
Yeah, can you use the microphone?
That's good. Mostly autodidacta, self-educated, because he lived in the house of his father. Was everybody from literature, from art. People was always there, so he kind of absorbed all this influence. And he was not trained as an artist, as many of that time were students of Serpa at the Museum of Modern Art, as Antonio Manuel, for instance, no? And Valtércio Caldas, but Tunga no.
Because you went to architecture school, right?
Yeah,
But did you finish your question, Sérgio? Was there more there?
No, I was just wondering whether that lack of connection, that generation kind of pushing to.
I think you're right, because that connection with Serpa went mostly to abstract, geometric, new concrete, and Tunga went the other way.
And it's an older generation too, those artists working with Serpa.
Serpa, yes, for an older generation, but he was very influential in his courses at the Museum of Modern Art.
Oh, I know.
Yeah,
I'm
he
aware.
was a very important figure.
Yes. And there's some works that supposed to be in the show but aren't, and I'm very curious about them. You can see them in the brochure actually, and maybe online. The ones from the 60s that to me are very like Antonio Diaz-esque. And do you know a little bit about the history of those?
Antonio Diaz was, he felt that Antonio Diaz was a great artist, and there's some of his works that has an Antonio Diaz touch. But he admired Antonio Diaz for a few reasons. First, he was a great artist. Second, he sang very well. Third, he was kind of recognized internationally. And fourth, he was admired socially, you know? So it was the kind of a model of artist that Tunga wanted to be. And I think he surpassed Antonio Diaz in this sense. Because Antonio Diaz was in Milan in the 70s. He was into the avant-garde, European avant-garde, but I don't think he reached the influence or the presence that Tunga had internationally, especially also mostly in France and Europe, I think, less in the USA, unfortunately. Mm-hmm. I hope this will change.
Yeah, we have time. Any last thoughts or comments or reflections?
Yeah. Yes, this is very interesting. Many artists, important artists in Brazil went to architecture school, not to art school. Especially in Rio, because the school I teach, which is the School of Fine Arts of the Federal University of Rio, is the school that was founded in 1808 when the Portuguese royal family fled Portugal during the Napoleonic invasion of the Iberic Peninsula. So when this shows how Brazil is something unique, because for once, the capital of the empire was Rio de Janeiro, which was the colony, not the metropolis, not Lisbon. So something, and this school was founded in the French Académie des Beaux-Arts model. So it was a very traditional, and it was very traditional, I would say, until the 60s, even the 70s. So no young artists would be interested in going to the school. What he had to do, drawing from the nudes, etc., etc., etc.
I mean, but even if you think of someone like Lígia Papi, like she is, she's thinking about the poetics of space and this kind of larger idea of urban planning and the city as a kind of conceptual Moebius loop. And if we think of even Tunga's video work, where he's dealing with the tunnel, I think there's a way in which Rio exists as a space of movement that is very much connected to these ideas.
Yes, I think Lígia was much more linked to the to the city, to the urban, what was happening in the city than Tunga. Not that Tunga was not linked, but Lígia liked to drive in late hours around the city, and she kind of also connected, like Hélio, with people from favelas, from the periphery of Rio de Janeiro. So this is something. But the most surprising thing is that she became a professor of the federal, it's called the
exactly.
Bolsa.
Yeah.
And so that was the moment that things start to change there. It's not anymore, it still has some traces of the traditional School of Fine Arts, but it has changed a lot since I'm there for 20 years or a bit more, and I feel that there are young artists, contemporary artists, is very different than when in the 70s, when no one would go to the School of Fine Arts.
All right, maybe we'll leave it there. Any final thoughts?
Yes, we'd like to thank you for
Yes,
coming.
thank you all for having us.